You're sitting alone in a quiet room, the soft hum of the world outside pressing against your ears. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, no argument, no insult, no betrayal, but beneath the calm, something thrums like an unseen current. A subtle heat rises in your chest. Your hands clench involuntarily. Your jaw tightens. And just like that, the sensation arrives. Anger. Not the dramatic, explosive kind you see in movies or hear in gossip. Not the fleeting irritation that disappears with a deep breath. No, this is something more insidious, more persistent. It feels like a whisper at first, but then it grows louder, a pulse of intensity running through your veins. And somehow, the world seems simultaneously smaller and heavier. Most people will tell you to suppress it. Smile, breathe, count to 10. Avoid confrontation. Label it negative. Anger, they say, is a weakness, a threat to your relationships, a flaw in your character, a destructive force that must be tamed. But what if that conventional wisdom is wrong? What if anger is not merely a warning signal, but a map? What if the very feeling you've been trained to ignore, hide, or apologize for holds the keys to your growth, your power, your awakening? Think about it. We are taught to fear anger, to fear its intensity, to fear what it might do to us or to others. We imagine it as a monster that will consume us if we glance too closely, yet it never truly disappears. Instead, it simmers quietly, a constant companion whispering truths we're too scared to face. Ask yourself, why does it exist in the first place? Why does it flare in moments when your sense of fairness, your dignity, or your boundaries are threatened? Why does it feel both terrifying and alive? And why does ignoring it leave a strange hollow inside you, a restlessness you cannot name? Imagine two people in identical circumstances. One experiences anger but buries it, labeling it wrong, unhelpful, destructive. The other notices it, follows its path, questions it, learns from it. One person becomes numb, disconnected, trapped in patterns of avoidance. The other begins to move toward something previously unimaginable: clarity, understanding, mastery. Both feel the heat, but only one lets it become a guide. Anger is paradoxical. It can destroy or illuminate. It can isolate or liberate. It can tighten your chest until you feel imprisoned, or it can awaken your mind until you feel limitless. You may have felt this contradiction before. The urge to lash out versus the need to stay composed, the thrill of righteous indignation versus the shame of losing control. But in that tension, in that impossible balance, lies a hidden truth most never dare to explore. Why do we fear it so much when it is a reflection of something essential within us? Why do we see it as an enemy when, in truth, it carries a message we desperately need to hear? You have felt it before. The burn of injustice, the sting of betrayal, the quiet simmer of frustration at a life that seems unjust or misaligned, and every time you've been told, don't act, don't think, don't feel. Label it bad and move on. Yet the feeling lingers, refusing to vanish completely, waiting for acknowledgement. So, here is the question you've never been asked. What if the anger you fear is not a mistake, a flaw, or a threat, but a compass pointing you toward your deepest truths? What if the heat in your chest is the fire of transformation, a force capable of forging new strength, clarity, and growth, if you only knew how to listen? Before you push it away, before you apologize to the world or yourself, pause. Imagine letting it speak instead of silencing it. Imagine following its rhythm, tracing its energy through the labyrinth of your thoughts, desires, and fears. Imagine the life you might find on the other side of the anger you've been told to suppress. Because the power of anger is hidden, subtle, and paradoxical. It doesn't announce itself with banners or fanfare. It waits, patient and persistent, until you either ignore it or awaken to its purpose. And awakening requires courage, insight, and a willingness to face the parts of yourself you've long denied. The question is, are you ready to see what your anger really wants to teach you? The next section will explore the hidden psychological and philosophical roots of anger, showing why it exists, why society tells you to suppress it, and how thinkers like Jung, Nietzsche, and Sartre illuminate its transformative potential. Anger is not a flaw. It is not a lapse of character. And yet, from the moment you first felt it as a child, the world treated it as if it were dangerous, illegitimate, or shameful. You were told to sit down, breathe, apologize, or smile, because strong emotions are inconvenient, uncomfortable, and socially disruptive. The subtle message was clear. Your anger is wrong. Hide it, control it, erase it. But why do we respond this way? Why has society, psychology, and even morality itself conspired to teach you that one of your most powerful inner forces is unacceptable? Carl Jung offers insight here. He believed that anger, like all intense emotions, is a reflection of the unconscious. When you feel rage, irritation, or indignation, the psyche is signaling that something within you has been violated. Your boundaries, your values, your sense of self. Anger is not an accident. It is a compass, pointing toward what you need to confront, understand, or integrate. Jung described the parts of ourselves we repress as the shadow, the hidden reservoir of emotion, desire, and instinct. Anger, especially the anger we are trained to suppress, often lives there. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It festers, influencing decisions, relationships, and self-perception from beneath the surface. Friedrich Nietzsche understood anger differently, but no less profoundly. He saw it as an affirmation of life, a rejection of injustice and mediocrity. For Nietzsche, anger that arises from perceiving a violation of your values is not destructive. It is a signal that your will, your strength, and your ideals are alive. Suppressing it in order to fit into societal expectations weakens the very life force that drives self-overcoming. He wrote extensively about the dangers of modernity, of social conformity, and of the subtle ways civilization discourages authentic expression. When your society teaches you that anger is bad, it is not protecting you, it is directing your energy away from self-realization. Arthur Schopenhauer offers yet another lens. He saw human suffering as arising not only from desire, but from frustration. The gap between the world as it is and the world as we believe it should be. Anger, in this sense, is the raw response to a perceived injustice, a recognition that reality fails to match your expectations. Schopenhauer understood that anger is often painful, sometimes destructive, but it is a truthful emotional reaction to the constraints, betrayals, and absurdities of life. To deny it is to deny reality itself. Jean-Paul Sartre, meanwhile, emphasizes the existential weight of emotions. To feel anger is to confront the freedom and responsibility of your own consciousness. Anger is existential because it reveals your values, your boundaries, and the stakes you place on the world. Sartre argued that emotions are not passive. They are active interpretations, a way of shaping the world to fit your sense of self. Anger, then, is not a failure of control. It is an active engagement with reality. To repress it is to deny your own freedom to respond authentically to what matters. Viktor Frankl, the psychologist who survived the Holocaust, provides another critical perspective. Frankl observed that suffering becomes unbearable when it is meaningless. Anger, particularly anger at injustice, violation, or moral betrayal, is a natural response to a world that sometimes lacks sense, fairness, or compassion. He would argue that anger is a call to meaning, a signal that something in your life demands attention, correction, or action. Suppressing it may maintain short-term peace, but it robs you of clarity, energy, and the ability to respond with purpose. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies show that anger is often mischaracterized as purely destructive when it is, in fact, a highly adaptive emotion. It sharpens attention, energizes the body, and focuses cognition toward resolving perceived threats or injustices. Repressed anger, conversely, is linked to chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and physical health issues. The mind does not forget what it refuses to feel. It stores it in subtle ways that shape behavior, relationships, and even your sense of identity. And yet, despite all of this, the prevailing cultural narrative remains. Anger is dangerous, ugly, socially unacceptable. The problem is not anger itself. The problem is how the world has taught you to interpret it. From an early age, you are trained to see it as a threat rather than a signal, a poison rather than a potential source of insight. You learn to distrust your own intensity, to apologize for feeling deeply, to disguise your fire. Over time, this creates a psychic imbalance. Energy is trapped, awareness dulls, and the very force that could fuel your transformation is buried beneath shame, fear, and denial. Here lies the paradox. The more society teaches you to suppress anger, the more you internalize its lessons, and the more it silently shapes your life. You may feel powerless, frustrated, or stagnant, but it is not because anger itself is destructive. It is because its energy has been misdirected, ignored, or repressed. The world tells you that anger is wrong. Your psyche tells you it is necessary, and in that conflict, your growth stalls. This hidden problem is subtle. It is woven into morality, psychology, and social expectation. Few people recognize it. Fewer still explore it. And yet, if you can see it, acknowledge it, and learn to harness it, anger transforms from a source of shame into a catalyst for insight, clarity, and personal evolution. But before you can harness it, you must understand the consequences of ignoring it, the ways it silently manipulates your relationships, clouds your judgment, and erodes your energy. Only then can you begin to reclaim its power and turn it toward your growth. Anger, when ignored or suppressed, does not vanish quietly. It seeps into the cracks of your life, infiltrating the spaces where you least expect it. You feel fatigued, restless, or inexplicably dissatisfied. You wonder why motivation slips through your fingers, why decisions feel heavier than they should, why relationships carry an unspoken tension. The culprit is rarely recognized. It is the hidden, unacknowledged anger lodged in your psyche, quietly shaping reality from the inside out. Think of your mind as a river. When anger is expressed and understood, it flows. It nourishes thought, illuminates boundaries, and carves a path toward clarity. But when it is suppressed, the river stalls. It forms stagnant pools, breeding confusion, resentment, and subtle distortions in perception. Over time, these stagnant waters flood the landscape of your consciousness. You begin to interpret minor slights as unbearable offenses. You internalize frustration as personal failure. You judge yourself harshly for feelings that were meant to guide you, not harm you. Cognitive science explains this with startling clarity. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and self-control, works in tandem with the amygdala, the seat of emotion and threat detection. Anger triggers the amygdala, preparing the body for action. But if expression is blocked, the energy does not dissipate. Instead, it feeds rumination, intensifying the perception of threats, magnifying negative memories, and biasing your interpretation of the world. You begin to see injustice everywhere, even where it does not exist. and you lose the ability to distinguish real threats from imagined ones. Moreover, suppressed anger subtly rewires behavior. Neurologically, repeated inhibition of emotion strengthens avoidance patterns. Your brain learns that expressing intensity is dangerous, so it defaults to caution, hesitation, or passivity. What could have been assertive energy becomes indecision, procrastination, or self-doubt. You may label yourself unmotivated or weak, when in truth, you are acting under the heavy weight of a suppressed emotional current. Socially, the consequences are equally insidious. Unacknowledged anger seeps into relationships like an invisible poison. It manifests as irritability, sarcasm, passive aggression, or withdrawal. Those closest to you may notice tension, but not the source, interpreting it as moodiness or detachment. They react, you respond defensively, and a cycle of misunderstanding perpetuates itself. Anger, ignored, becomes a silent architect of relational distance, eroding intimacy and trust without ever announcing its presence. Culturally, the suppression of anger serves a more complex function. Modern society idealizes calm, politeness, and measured behavior, equating control with virtue. Expressing anger is framed as morally suspect, socially inappropriate, or psychologically unstable. This pressure teaches you to self-censor, internalize, and rationalize. Over time, you learn to distrust your own feelings, questioning whether your perceptions, needs, and boundaries are legitimate. You begin to live according to external rules rather than internal truth. The anger that should have been a compass becomes a ghost, guiding you away from authenticity rather than toward it. Philosophers have long observed these consequences. Nietzsche described the resentful soul, one who internalizes frustration and injustice, allowing it to fester and distort their perception of the world. The energy that could fuel creativity, self-assertion, or transformation is instead recycled into bitterness and passive suffering. Schopenhauer saw the same phenomenon. The mind, when denied the natural expression of desire or response, turns inwards, creating suffering not directly caused by external reality, but by the repression of inner truth. Jung identified the shadow as the repository of what we refuse to acknowledge, often including anger. Left unexamined, the shadow projects outward. We see faults in others that exist within ourselves, misjudge intentions, or harbor inexplicable animosities. These unconscious projections distort perception, leading to patterns of conflict, avoidance, and self-sabotage. Every minor disagreement, every irritation, becomes amplified, not because the world is inherently hostile, but because your unacknowledged anger is shaping the lens through which you experience it. Even physical health is affected. Chronic suppression of emotion triggers stress responses, elevated cortisol, tension in the muscles, increased blood pressure, and heightened susceptibility to illness. The body remembers what the mind cannot name. Anger stored internally becomes invisible pressure, manifesting as headaches, fatigue, digestive issues, or general malaise. Your vitality is siphoned, not by external circumstances, but by an unresolved internal energy. And yet, the most profound consequence is perhaps the loss of self-understanding. Anger carries information. It signals violation, misalignment, or the presence of unfulfilled values. Ignoring it is like turning away from a map in the middle of a forest. You wander, directionless, feeling frustrated and incomplete, unable to discern the paths that truly serve your growth. Suppression breeds confusion, not clarity. You may develop coping mechanisms, routines, distractions, humor, overachievement, but beneath the surface, the energy that could guide your evolution remains trapped, a latent force waiting to be recognized. Consider the irony. The very emotion that has the potential to awaken awareness and drive transformation is simultaneously feared, misunderstood, and discarded. Anger's power is invisible precisely because it is concealed. It shapes thought, behavior, relationships, and health without overt notice, like a silent current beneath the calm surface of the ocean. Those who fail to understand it often misinterpret its effects as weakness, temper, or personal failure, never realizing that they are being guided by a force that could have illuminated their path. But there is hope. Recognizing the unseen consequences of anger is the first step toward reclaiming its power. Once acknowledged, anger ceases to be a silent saboteur and becomes a tool for insight, clarity, and transformation. The energy is no longer wasted on rumination or misperception. It can be harnessed to fuel growth, set boundaries, and inspire action aligned with truth. The question is not whether anger will influence your life. It already has. The real question is, will you remain unconscious of its power, or will you learn to wield it as a force for your evolution? Imagine standing in front of a mirror, but it doesn't reflect the person you think you are. Instead, it shows the tension, the frustration, the silent, coiled energy of anger you've spent years denying. It is uncomfortable, unsettling, perhaps even frightening, and yet this is where the possibility of freedom begins. To break free, you must first confront the very thing you have been taught to fear. The rebellion begins with acknowledgement. Most people respond to anger with avoidance or shame, but true liberation requires the opposite, curiosity. Instead of silencing the heat inside, lean into it. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? Why does this arise now? What truth am I avoiding? Anger, when explored rather than suppressed, reveals the exact areas of your life that are misaligned with your values, unmet in your needs, or compromised in your boundaries. Carl Jung taught that the shadow, the repository of unacknowledged emotion, desire, and instinct, must be integrated to achieve wholeness. Anger, especially suppressed anger, is often lodged in the shadow. Integration does not mean expression without control, nor does it mean indulgence. It means observing, understanding, and channeling it constructively. Imagine transforming that coiled energy from a silent saboteur into a compass pointing toward self-mastery. The first step is recognition. Begin by noticing the bodily sensations that accompany anger. The tightening in your chest, the heat in your limbs, the tension in your jaw. Instead of pushing these sensations away, breathe into them. Allow yourself to name what you feel. This is anger. This is indignation. This is frustration. Labeling emotion, as modern psychology confirms, creates distance, enabling conscious engagement rather than reactive habit. Awareness alone begins to release its grip. Next comes analysis. Nietzsche's philosophy offers insight here. He believed that anger and resentment, if left unexamined, become destructive forces, but if consciously observed, they can catalyze transformation. Ask yourself, what injustice or misalignment triggered this anger? Which expectations or values are being violated? What parts of my life have been ignored or suppressed? This is not a blame exercise, it is a diagnostic one. You are mapping the terrain of your own psyche. Once recognized and analyzed, the energy of anger can be redirected. Historical figures illustrate this power vividly. Consider Martin Luther King Jr., whose righteous anger at systemic injustice became a guiding force for social transformation. Consider Viktor Frankl, who channeled frustration and suffering into meaning, purpose, and resilience, even in the most unimaginable circumstances. The same energy that could have consumed them, paralyzed them, or led to bitterness was instead harnessed as fuel for clarity, action, and growth. Rebellion also requires a change in perspective. Most people believe anger is inherently destructive, but the truth is far more nuanced. Anger is neutral. It is energy. It can destroy or it can illuminate depending on how it is approached. By reframing anger as a guide rather than a threat, you reclaim authority over your inner world. You shift from passive victim to active participant. You stop reacting automatically and start responding deliberately. Practical strategies emerge naturally from this shift. Journaling is one. Write down what triggers your anger, what thoughts accompany it, and what actions it inspires. Speak it aloud, privately, or with a trusted confidant, transforming raw intensity into conscious articulation. Physical activity is another. The body is a conduit for energy. Channel it into movement, creation, or disciplined action, releasing pressure without suppression. Boundaries are equally critical. Anger often signals a violation of limits. By setting and enforcing clear boundaries, you honor the truth your anger points toward. There is also a radical psychological insight here. Anger is often a messenger of authenticity. Jean-Paul Sartre would argue that by confronting your anger, you confront your own freedom and responsibility. It reveals where your life is out of alignment with your authentic self and points the way toward choices that honor that self. To ignore anger is to deny your freedom. To embrace it is to reclaim it. The rebellion is not comfortable. It is not polite. It does not conform to social expectations of calm, decorum, or smiling submission. It demands courage, the courage to face discomfort, to challenge internalized judgments, and to act in alignment with your values despite fear of judgment or reprisal. It is a rebellion, not against others, but against the internalized narratives that have silenced your emotional truth for years. And yet, the power gained is transformative. Anger ceases to be a shadowy force manipulating your decisions unconsciously. It becomes a flashlight, illuminating the areas of your life that require change, courage, and attention. It becomes a sword, cutting through indecision, passivity, and self-doubt. It becomes a compass, pointing toward authentic action, personal growth, and alignment with your deepest truths. This rebellion culminates in a radical ownership of self. You no longer apologize for what you feel. You no longer doubt the legitimacy of your responses. You no longer allow external rules or cultural conditioning to dictate your inner life. Anger becomes a partner in your growth rather than an enemy in your psyche. You feel it, understand it, channel it, and in doing so, you reclaim energy, focus, and clarity. The final stage of this rebellion is integration. It is not about anger dominating your life. It is about using it as a tool. Every time frustration arises, you pause, observe, and ask, what does this reveal? What boundary is being crossed? What action aligns with truth? This is the alchemy of personal growth, turning raw, intense emotion into wisdom, agency, and purposeful movement. The rebellion is difficult but necessary. Every step forward requires embracing what you were taught to fear. Every breakthrough begins with the simple act of acknowledging the heat inside you instead of running from it. The path from suppression to mastery is not linear. It is jagged, intense, and occasionally uncomfortable, but it leads to a freedom few ever experience. The freedom of self-knowledge, authenticity, and the ability to turn raw, powerful emotion into fuel for transformation. And once you have mastered this rebellion, a deeper truth emerges, one that reframes everything you thought you knew about emotion, power, and growth. But before you see it clearly, there is one more revelation you must encounter. The ultimate power that lies in understanding anger itself, not just as a tool, but as a gateway to your fullest potential. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, turbulent ocean. The waves crash relentlessly, dark and roaring, yet in their motion there is a rhythm, a pattern, a hidden order. This ocean is your anger, your intensity, the raw fire you have carried, resisted, and feared for years. And now, after recognition, reflection, and deliberate rebellion, you understand a truth so profound that it reframes your life. Anger is not an enemy. It is a gateway. You've learned to see it as a guide, a mirror, a source of insight. But the ultimate realization goes beyond seeing anger as useful or transformative. The final truth is this: anger is the pulse of your authentic self. Every surge of indignation, every flash of frustration, every simmer of resentment is the psyche communicating what matters, what is violated, what is worthy of defense. Anger is not chaos. It is the signal of your deepest values being challenged. Every suppressed outburst, every hidden grievance, every "shouldn't have felt that" moment was a missed opportunity to connect with yourself, to listen, to understand what you truly demand from life. This is the paradox that has haunted humanity for centuries. The very force we are trained to fear, the emotion we label bad or destructive, is the same force that can illuminate our path to self-realization. Anger is not a curse. It is a compass, a catalyst, and a clarifying lens. It strips away illusion and complacency, showing what is authentic, what is unjust, and what is unresolved within us. Think of the human experience without anger. Would you ever demand justice? Would you confront betrayal? Would you break free from toxic patterns or oppressive expectations? Without anger, the fire that motivates action would be absent. Without it, complacency would reign. The suppression of anger is not peace, it is stagnation. The embrace of anger, when understood and integrated, is liberation. The final, most powerful realization is that anger's energy is your own energy. It has always belonged to you. You have been taught to treat it as alien, threatening, or shameful, but it is yours, the raw vitality of your mind, body, and spirit, asserting itself against violation, indifference, and injustice. To harness it is not to become uncontrollable or destructive. It is to reclaim the power that has been misdirected for years, hidden under fear, guilt, and societal conditioning. Philosophers and psychologists offer a lens, but this truth is experiential. Jung tells us to integrate the shadow. Nietzsche tells us to transform resentment into affirmation. Sartre tells us to embrace freedom and responsibility. Frankl teaches us to convert suffering into meaning. Each of these perspectives converges on the same principle. When anger is consciously understood, it becomes an engine of growth, a bridge between unconscious energy and deliberate action. Now, imagine a life where anger no longer dictates your behavior unconsciously. You feel its pulse, but you are not a prisoner to it. You channel it toward insight, what needs attention, what requires correction, what must be defended, what is a boundary that cannot be violated. You channel it toward action, not blind rage, but deliberate steps that align with your values, protect your integrity, and fuel purposeful movement. You channel it toward transformation, turning the raw fire into creativity, ambition, clarity, and courage. The ultimate truth also reframes your relationship with others. Anger is no longer a source of shame, guilt, or fear in your interactions. Instead, it becomes an honest communicator. You can assert yourself, enforce boundaries, and respond to injustice without apology or self-recrimination. Relationships are not strained by hidden resentment, but are clarified through authenticity. You no longer allow suppressed frustration to fester into passive aggression, bitterness, or silent withdrawal. Your anger becomes transparent, intentional, and constructive. This realization ripples through every aspect of life. Decisions become clearer, priorities sharpen. Your energy, once wasted on rumination, misdirected resentment, or self-doubt, is now available to create, build, and live deliberately. The exhaustion that comes from fighting your own inner fire disappears, replaced by a steady, empowered vitality. You become, in essence, your own guide, your own guardian, your own alchemist, transforming emotion into wisdom. And here is the poetic culmination. Anger, once feared and denied, is revealed as life itself asserting its presence through you. It is a signal that you are alive, that you care, that you possess the power to discern, choose, and act. Every pulse, every surge, every flash of intensity is an invitation to awaken, to reclaim agency, and to engage fully with existence. Imagine walking forward with this understanding. You feel the heat of anger rise, but you no longer recoil. You observe, you listen, you channel, and you act. Each challenge becomes a teacher, each violation a signal, each frustration an opportunity to define and defend your life according to your authentic values. You move through the world with clarity, intensity, and integrity, not as someone who has mastered anger by suppressing it, but as someone who has mastered themselves by embracing it. And in this mastery, something extraordinary happens. You are no longer at war with your own mind. You are no longer exhausted by suppressed energy or haunted by unacknowledged rage. You are whole, alive, and attuned to the subtle, powerful currents that drive growth. Anger, once hidden and feared, becomes your ally, your teacher, and your guide. The ultimate haunting, liberating truth is this: to deny anger is to deny life itself. To embrace it consciously is to awaken fully.